Denji might be bottom tier fodder. Like, I'm talking level 1 bandit whose sole purpose is to help you navigate your abilities. But why am I, you ask? Why am I comparing the main character of a top tier shonen to NPCs? Well, that's because he's extremely weak when it comes to the eye test. And that's exactly the problem. Denji suffers from something that has absolutely nothing to do with his abilities. And that first issue is imposter syndrome. See, Denji isn't weak because he lacks power. In fact, on paper, he's actually built different. But the problem is, he doesn't believe it himself. His entire existence started from nothing. He's not a prodigy or someone who trained to get strong. He's just a kid who went through and sold organs just to survive and got lucky enough to fuse with a devil. So when he's suddenly thrown into a world filled with monsters and literal gods, he's still that same broke kid mentally. That's what makes Denji so interesting though, because his weaknesses are actually psychological, unlike what we typically see. While every other shonen protagonist has a goal that defines them, like becoming a Hokage, or maybe even finding the One Piece, Denji's dream is just painfully simple. Eat good food and talk to pretty women. And because his ambitions are so grounded, he never feels like he belongs in the world of these heroes and devils. Even when he wins, it doesn't feel like he earned it with a sense of accomplishment. It feels like he just survived. And that's a classic imposter syndrome side effect. I mean, think about it. When Makima praises him, he doesn't feel prideful that he just did something good. It's more a relief than anything. When Reze falls for him, he doesn't feel the love, and he couldn't fathom the idea of someone like her falling for him. So instead, what does he do? He decides to feel lucky. Denji is constantly measuring his own worth by what others give him and not what he is. And that's why, no matter how strong he gets, he still feels weak, because his biggest enemy isn't the gun devil or any hybrid. It's the version of himself that believes he doesn't deserve to exist in his story at all. We've seen examples of this in other anime like Vegeta. Vegeta's entire character is built on pride, and his strength comes from constantly trying to outdo someone else, usually Goku. But when he loses, that failure becomes fuel. Denji does not have that at all. When he loses, it's confirmation, or more so proof, at least in his mind, that he never really belonged in the first place. That's the difference between these two imposter syndromes. For someone like Vegeta, weakness is a temporary state and something to overcome. For Denji, weakness feels like an identity. He doesn't even know who he is without struggle or someone telling him what to do or want. I mean, think about it again. When Makima gives him orders, he follows. When Reze shows him affection, he can't control himself and caves immediately. Even when Power and Aki treat him like family, he clings on to it for dear life. Every part of his sense of self depends on the people around him. And when those people are gone, what's left? That's why he feels so weak, even though he's one of the most dangerous hybrids in existence. Because Denji's story isn't about becoming stronger. It's overall just about trying to find a reason to exist when strength isn't enough. In a world where power equals purpose, Denji has the power, but none of the drive that creates that purpose. And that's what breaks him. That's why every victory feels so hollow, and it still seems like he's empty inside. Which leads to the second reason being his attachment issues. Before watching the movie Reze, I knew Denji was normal-ish and had regular tendencies of a teenage boy with a crush. He praised Makima because she praised him back. It was an equal exchange for both, so it made sense why he was obsessed. But then I watched the movie and realized he would have legit fell for anyone showing him the slightest of attention. And this ties back to his attachment issue. But this is quite odd though, because normally with orphans and people who are abandoned, you see them having a more detachment issue where they love the solitude, but this is something else. He mentioned not wanting to leave Aki and Power to run off with her because he knew life was finally getting good for him. And obviously the good food played a part as well, but he still did not want to leave. And the thing is, Denji doesn't crave love the way other people do. He craves belonging. I mean, love can come, love can go, but belonging gives you that stability he so lacked throughout his entire childhood. Denji never had that growing up. His dad was gone, his mom died, and the only family he ever had before Aki and Power was a chainsaw. So when people finally start treating him like a human being, you can understand why he clings on. Because deep down, he's terrified that if he lets go, he's going to go back to being that same lonely kid sleeping in a shack with nothing but debt and a dream. So when people leave or die or even betray him, he loses the piece of himself that was attached to them. That's why his attachment issues are so dangerous. Every time someone disappears, he has to rebuild who he is from scratch. And you can only do that so many times before you start wondering if there's anything ever left to rebuild. And that's what makes Denji weaker mentally. The fact that every person who loves him just ends up proving his biggest fear right. That love doesn't last, and that maybe he doesn't deserve it at all in the first place. Not because he isn't strong, but because his entire life has taught him that strength doesn't save the people you care about most. Which leads to the final reason he is still weak, being he doesn't understand himself. I told a slight lie in the beginning of the video when I said him being weak had nothing to do with his abilities, because the other two both tied directly into how they stunt his growth. If you listen to what Shark Boy said, he told Denji that he was not using the chainsaw powers the way they should be used. Other hybrids like Reze use their abilities to propel themselves forward, stop in their tracks, tank attacks, versus Denji just being a raw dog animal, no pun intended. He fights with pure instinct, and that's always a double-edged sword because on one hand, you got characters like Goku or Inosuke whose identity is to rely on their instincts because they're spot on. But on the other hand, you got people like Denji who uses their instincts and just end up obliterated in the process. His instincts aren't even sharpened by experience or philosophy. He's just fighting not to die. And that's a completely different mindset. When you're fighting to survive, you're reactive and not necessarily strategic. And that's Denji in a nutshell. Every single battle is chaos because that's all he's ever known. He fights with that panic and desperation, but tries to disguise it as that confidence. I mean, remember that moment in the movie when he's getting tossed around like Jogo in Shibuya? He just keeps charging in with no plan, just pure emotion. And yeah, it's fun as hell to watch, but it's also kind of eye-opening because you realize that's just how he lives his entire life. Denji has no fighting style or technique because he doesn't really have a sense of self. His chainsaws are just an extension of the chaos he has in his mind, and it gives him a reason to be so rambunctious. So when Shark Boy tells him that he's not using his powers right, he's not just talking about the technique, but more about his identity. The Chainsaw Man Devil is fear itself. It's supposed to make others tremble, but Denji doesn't even understand what people would even fear about him specifically. That's the tragic irony. The world sees the chainsaw as its unstoppable, horrifying nature, and yet Denji still sees himself as the same orphan from the slums. So when you combine that with imposter syndrome and attachment issues, you get someone who's powerful enough to split buildings in half, but emotionally fragile enough to break from a single heartbreak. So yeah, Denji's weak, but not because he can't fight. He's weak because he doesn't know why he's fighting, and then he lacks that sense of self. And until he learns that, he'll just keep feeling powerless. But Denji's weakness isn't a flaw in the writing, it's the point. He's living proof that power doesn't fix the holes in your life. You can slay devils or you can save people, but if you never figure out who you are underneath all that noise, what's the point? And maybe that's what makes him one of the most realist characters in modern anime, because who hasn't felt like that?